In Chapter 4 of Wuthering Heights, Mr. Lockwood, now back at Thrushcross Grange, finds out that Mrs. Dean, a servant who lived there for 18 years, knows about Heathcliff and Cathy's past. He entices her to keep him company and gossip about their neighbors at Wuthering Heights. Mr. Lockwood is itching to find out more about Cathy. Mrs. Dean begins to tell their story, beginning in the past. Heathcliff, a homeless orphan, is brought home by Mr. Earnshaw from a trip to Liverpool. Before he leaves for his trip, Mr. Earnshaw asks his children, Cathy and Hindley, what gifts they would like him to bring back from Liverpool. Cathy wants a whip. Hindley wants a fiddle. Remembering the young servant in training, Mrs. Dean, called Nellie or Ellen back then, he promises to bring her apples and pears. However, Mr. Earnshaw loses the whip and the fiddle is crushed on the long walk home with Heathcliff. Exhausted when he arrives, Mr. Earnshaw says the trip nearly killed him. He tells his family to take Heathcliff, who may be a gift from God or from the devil. Mrs. Earnshaw calls Heathcliff a gypsy brat, but agrees to take him in. Disappointed about losing their gifts, Cathy and Hindley treat Heathcliff terribly. But Cathy eventually befriends him, and he becomes Mr. Earnshaw's favorite. Ellen, the future Mrs. Dean, despises Heathcliff too, until Hindley, Cathy, and Heathcliff get the measles. Ellen then steps wholly into her position as a servant and cares for the sick children. And Heathcliff's sweetness during this illness changes her feelings toward him. She wonders what Mr. Earnshaw loves so much about Heathcliff to favor him over Hindley. Then she recalls when Mr. Earnshaw brought 2 horses, one for Hindley and one for Heathcliff. Heathcliff picks the handsomest, but when it falls lame, he demands Hindley's horse. When Hindley refuses to trade, Heathcliff picks a fight, provoking Hindley so he can use his bruises as proof to make Mr. Earnshaw beat Hindley. Hindley gives Heathcliff the horse, saying, "I pray that he may break your neck," and calls Heathcliff imp of Satan. Ellen persuades Heathcliff to take the horse and not tell on Hindley. Since he takes her advice, she mistakenly believes he's not vindictive. The structure of Wuthering Heights in Chapter 4 leaves the present. Through its second narrator, Mrs. Dean, it dives into the past. Mrs. Dean quickly corrects herself when she says us, referring to the Lintons, a wealthy family whose storyline hasn't developed yet. The reader will come to learn Mrs. Dean is truly a part of the family, yet her station in life as a servant prevents her from being acknowledged as such by the other upper-class main characters. The theme of good versus evil is symbolized by the fiddle and the whip, and develops in Heathcliff. Will he become good or evil? Or is he already evil when he arrives? From the start, Heathcliff inspires strong, polarizing reactions of love and hate.